I was sitting at my own engagement dinner when my mother placed her wine glass on the table, looked me in the eye, and told me to cancel my wedding date so my sister could have the venue. She said my sister's engagement party to a Virginia real estate heir was simply a higher priority than my marriage to a high school history teacher. My father nodded, checking his watch, while my sister sat there with a smug little smile, already texting her friends the good news. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink. I just smiled, looked right back at them and said, "Of course, take the date." They thought they had won. They had no idea I was about to hand them the rope that would unravel their entire lives. Before I tell you exactly how I ruined them, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Grape Echo Stories. But only if this story earns it. Drop your age and your local time in the comments. I really want to know who is listening right now. The clinking of heavy silver against fine china echoed through my parents' dining room in McLean. The air smelled of roasted lamb and simmering tension. "I secured Oakwood Manor," I announced, setting my fork down on the linen tablecloth. "October 14th. The deposit cleared this morning." Ethan, sitting beside me, squeezed my knee under the table. He knew I had logged 80 hours of overtime auditing federal cybersecurity networks just to save the $15,000 for that deposit. Silence fell over the dining room. My mother, Nancy, did not offer a single word of congratulations. Instead, she picked up the bottle of Cabernet and reached across the table, bypassing my empty glass entirely to top off Preston. Preston Cole was my sister's fiancé, a man whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Loudoun County. "Oakwood," my sister Alyssa mused, tracing the rim of her crystal glass. Preston's mother told me Oakwood was the only acceptable location for our engagement gala. "We need October 14th to align with the autumn social season." My father cleared his throat. "Michelle, your sister is marrying into the Cole family. The societal expectations differ. Preston's parents are inviting state senators. Ethan's family," he waved a dismissive hand toward my fiancé, "they are practical people. They will not mind a delay. You can push your wedding to next spring." I felt Ethan shift beside me, drawing a sharp breath to speak. I pressed my hand down hard over his knee. "I already signed the contract," I said, keeping my voice flat. "It is just paperwork," my mother replied, her tone dripping with the kind of forced patience you use on a toddler. "You type at a desk all day. You know how to send an email and switch the name on a file. Let your sister have this. Family priorities come first." Alyssa finally looked at me. There was no guilt in her eyes, just a serene expectation that I would fold. I was the workhorse, she was the show pony. That was the dynamic we were raised in. I looked at my mother's cold gaze, my father's tired annoyance, and my sister's entitlement. I did not feel hurt anymore. I just felt a cold, structural clarity. "You are right," I said, letting a soft, agreeable smile form on my lips. "Family priorities first. You can have the date." Alyssa clapped her hands together, pulling out her phone. My mother let out a loud breath of relief. None of them noticed that my hands were perfectly steady. None of them realized that by demanding my venue, they had just secured their own financial destruction. The drive back to Alexandria was quiet. The rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers pushed away the Virginia drizzle, blurring the headlights of passing cars. Ethan kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, his jaw tight. I watched the reflection of the street lamp slide across the wet glass. "You shrank," he said, his voice soft but carrying a sharp edge in the confined space of the sedan. I turned my head toward him. "What do you mean?" "You always do it," he continued, glancing at me before turning back to the asphalt. "We walk into your parents' house and your shoulders drop. Your voice gets quieter. You fold yourself up into a neat little box so they can walk right over you. Why did you give them the venue, Michelle?" I did not answer right away. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. How could I explain a survival mechanism I had been perfecting for nearly 3 decades? When I was 16, I spent an entire summer shelving books at the local library to pay for a specialized SAT preparation course. I wanted an engineering scholarship. The acceptance letter for the prep program arrived on a Tuesday. The tuition was due that Friday. I had the cash sitting in a white envelope on my desk. That same Wednesday, Alyssa secured a boutique public relations internship in Washington. It was an unpaid position, obtained through a neighbor's connection. That evening, I walked into the living room to find my mother holding my envelope of cash. Alyssa sat on the sofa, surrounded by glossy shopping bags from high-end department stores. "Your sister needs a professional wardrobe," my mother had said, handing the thick envelope to Alyssa without breaking eye contact with me. "You can study on your own, Michelle. You are smart. Alyssa needs to look the part to get ahead. We are taking this as a family loan." They never paid me back. I studied from borrowed library books while Alyssa paraded around in silk blouses and tailored blazers. She quit the internship after 3 weeks because the hours were too demanding. That was the standard operating procedure in the Lee household. My ambition was the emergency fund for her vanity. I leaned my head against the cold passenger window, letting the memory fade into the hum of the tires. "I did not give them the venue, Ethan. I let them think they took it." He frowned, pulling the car onto the exit ramp leading toward our neighborhood. "What does that mean?" "It means I am done shrinking." The reality of our lives could not have been more different, yet my parents treated Alyssa like a fragile investment and me like a limitless credit line. I lived in a practical 2-bedroom apartment in Alexandria. My days consisted of staring at dual monitors, identifying vulnerabilities in defense contracting software, and untangling encrypted networks. My career required precision, silence, and relentless endurance. Alyssa lived in a sunlit, exposed brick loft in Reston. She worked 12 hours a week doing social media outreach for a wellness brand. Her rent cost double mine, and my father paid it on the first of every month without a single complaint. Yet, the moment I announced my engagement, the financial dynamic shifted into a weapon. 3 months ago, my father called a family meeting. He sat me down with a grim, serious expression holding a stack of financial printouts. He announced he was taking a $10,000 loan against his retirement account to help pay for my wedding catering. I had not asked for the money. I had explicitly told them I did not need it. My federal contracts paid well, and I had been saving meticulously. But my father insisted. He said it was his duty. Within a week, that money became a collar around my neck. Every decision I made was met with a reminder of his sacrifice. If I chose a floral arrangement my mother disliked, my father would sigh heavily. "I took a penalty on my retirement for this wedding, Michelle. The least you could do is listen to your mother about the centerpieces." If I wanted to limit the guest list to close friends, he would shake his head. $10,000 is a lot of money to not invite the neighbors who watched you grow up. The catering fund was never a gift. It was a purchase of my compliance. They bought a controlling stake in my wedding for $10,000, and they expected to direct the entire show. Ethan parked the car in our apartment building lot. He cut the engine, the sudden silence heavy between us. He turned in his seat, searching my face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "If you let them take Oakwood Manor," he said slowly, "they will just hold the catering money over your head to control whatever venue we choose next. They will force you to plan your own sister's party." I unbuckled my seatbelt. "I know. So what is the plan?" "The plan," I said, opening the car door to the damp night air, "is to cut the strings. All of them." We walked up the stairs to our apartment in silence. My mind was already mapping out the logistical framework of the operation. In cybersecurity, when a hostile entity infiltrates a network, you do not immediately shut down the system. You isolate the threat. You create a sandbox, a simulated environment that looks exactly like the real thing. You let the intruder operate inside the fake network, expending their resources, thinking they have won, while you gather all the evidence you need to destroy them. My parents and my sister were the hostile entities. Oakwood Manor was going to be the sandbox. I unlocked the front door and dropped my keys on the console table. The apartment was dark and quiet, a sanctuary away from the polished toxicity of McLean. Ethan walked into the kitchen to pour 2 glasses of water, giving me space to think. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, pulling my phone from my purse. The screen lit up with a new notification. It was a text message from Alyssa. "Hey," she wrote, "send me the venue coordinator's contact info right now. Preston's mother wants to schedule a walkthrough tomorrow morning to discuss the menu for the engagement gala. We need to lock down the floor plan." I stared at the glowing text. A sharp, cynical laugh caught in my throat. She had not even waited an hour. The dinner plates were probably still sitting unwashed on my mother's dining table, and Alyssa was already attempting to seize control of the logistics. If I gave her the actual email address for Valerie, the director at Oakwood Manor, the entire scheme would collapse. Valerie was a professional. She would immediately inform Alyssa that the contract was under my name, that the deposit was non-transferable, and that an engagement party required an entirely different billing structure than a wedding. My family would find out the truth before I had the chance to secure the trap. I needed time. I needed a buffer between my sister's arrogance and reality. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating the dark living room. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the practiced speed of someone who typed command codes for a living. I navigated to a free email provider and clicked the registration button. First name, Valerie. Last name, Events. I created a new address, Oakwood Coordinator Valerie at a generic domain. It took exactly 45 seconds to set up the account, verify the credentials, and forward the inbox to a secure folder on my phone. I picked up my mobile device and replied to my sister. Just sent the coordinator an introductory email, I typed. Her name is Valerie. Here is her direct address. I told her you would be taking over the communication for the October 14th date. I hit send. The 3 gray typing dots appeared on my screen almost instantly. Thanks, Alyssa replied. I will handle it from here. You can focus on finding a cheaper place for next spring. I locked my phone and set it face down on the coffee table. Ethan walked back into the living room, handing me a glass of water. He looked at the closed laptop, then at my face. What did you just do? He asked, his voice laced with a mixture of concern and deep curiosity. I took a slow sip of the cold water, feeling the chill run down my throat. I just became my sister's event coordinator, I replied. The stage was set. The bait was in the water. Tomorrow I would take a half-day off from the firm. I had a very real, very legal conversation to have with the actual director of Oakwood Manor. If my family wanted to play games with my future, they were going to learn what happened when they challenged someone who built firewalls for a living. I took a half-day on Tuesday. The drive west on Route 7 felt distinctly different today. Usually, the transition from the dense concrete grid of Alexandria into the rolling green hills of Loudoun County brought a sense of relief. Today, the landscape just looked like a chessboard. Oakwood Manor sits at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway. The estate features centuries-old brickwork, manicured gardens, and a tasting room that smells of aged oak and expensive wine. I parked my modest sedan near the back of the gravel lot, far away from the designated VIP spaces near the front entrance. I wanted to remain unseen. I needed to execute this transaction with surgical precision. Valerie sat behind a heavy mahogany desk in the events office. She was a sharp, polished woman in her late 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit. She possessed the kind of practiced, welcoming smile reserved for brides spending tens of thousands of dollars on a single evening. Michelle, she said, standing up to shake my hand, it is wonderful to see you. We need to finalize the tasting menu soon. How is the planning going? I did not return her smile. I sat in the leather chair opposite her desk and placed my leather portfolio on the smooth wood surface. I opened the folder, extracting the original signed contract and a freshly printed bank statement. The planning is over, Valerie, I said, keeping my voice low and even. I am canceling my wedding date for October 14th. Valerie stopped moving. Her professional demeanor faltered, replaced by genuine confusion. She looked at the contract resting on her desk, then back at my face. Michelle, I am so sorry. Did something happen with Ethan? If you need to postpone, we can look at the calendar for next year. Ethan and I are perfectly fine, I replied. The marriage is proceeding. The event at this location is not. I slid the bank statement across the desk. I tapped my index finger against the top line. The document showed a withdrawal of $15,000 transferred directly from my personal checking account to Oakwood Manor 3 months prior. My name was the only one on that account. My name was the only signature on the venue contract. I am the sole financial proprietor of this reservation, I stated. My parents did not contribute a single dollar to this deposit. My sister did not contribute. I own this date, and I am formally releasing it back to the venue. I understand the deposit is non-refundable. I am absorbing the penalty in full. Valerie picked up the paper, her brow furrowing. She had managed luxury weddings for a decade. She knew a distressed bride when she saw one. But I was not crying. My hands rested flat and steady on the armrests of my chair. My posture remained rigid. "If you cancel now," she said carefully, "the date opens up to the public. You lose the money. Are you certain you want to do this?" "I am certain, but I need to execute a specific administrative protocol before I leave this office." I pulled my laptop from my bag, waking the screen. In federal cybersecurity contracting, you learn that the most dangerous vulnerabilities do not come from external hackers. They come from internal social engineering. People handing over sensitive access just because someone asked nicely or threw a tantrum. I was going to seal every digital and legal crack in this contract. I logged into the Oakwood Manor client portal. Valerie watched me navigate to the authorized contacts page. When I first booked the venue, I had listed my mother, my father, and my sister as approved individuals who could call and ask questions about the menu or the seating chart. I clicked Edit. I deleted Nancy Lee. I deleted Brian Lee. I deleted Alyssa Lee. I changed the password to a 16 encrypted string. I updated the security questions to answers only I would know. "Valerie," I said, turning the laptop screen toward her so she could see the empty authorized user list, "I work in data security for the Department of Defense. I am applying those same principles to this contract. As of this exact second, I am the only authorized contact for file number 8472. Valerie leaned forward, reading the screen. "I understand." "No," I pressed, holding her gaze. "I need to make sure we are legally aligned on this matter. My family is currently under the impression that they are taking over this date for an engagement gala. They are going to call you. They are going to demand tours, floor plans, and catering updates for an event they believe they control." Valerie inhaled sharply, the reality of the toxic family dynamics clicking into place. "Oh," she whispered. "If they call," I continued, my tone clinical and detached, "your corporate privacy policy dictates that you cannot confirm or deny any details about this account. You cannot tell them I canceled. You cannot tell them the date is open. If they ask about October 14th, you are legally bound to state that you cannot discuss the reservation with unauthorized individuals. They are strangers to this venue." Valerie sat back in her chair. She looked at the voided contract, then at me. The empathy in her eyes shifted into a deep, professional respect. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a red pen, uncapping it with a sharp click. "Understood," Valerie said. She drew a thick red line through the secondary contacts on the physical file. She stamped the front page with a heavy void mark. "As the sole financial signatory, your privacy is protected under our corporate liability terms. If anyone other than Michelle Lee contacts this office regarding October 14th, they will be informed that we cannot disclose any information due to client confidentiality." "Thank you," I said, packing my laptop away. I stood up, shaking her hand one final time. I walked out of the events office, navigating the plush carpets of the manor hallways. The air conditioning felt crisp against my skin. The heavy weight of the $15,000 vanished, replaced by the intoxicating lightness of control. I exited through the heavy oak double doors and walked down the stone steps toward the gravel parking lot. The sky had turned a pale, bruised gray, threatening an afternoon storm. I climbed into my car, starting the engine, but I did not put it in drive. I rolled down the window just an inch, letting the scent of rain and crushed stone fill the cabin. I leaned back against the headrest and waited. 12 minutes later, a pristine white luxury sport utility vehicle turned onto the estate driveway. The tires crunched loudly against the gravel, rolling past my hidden parking spot and pulling directly into the reserved space near the entrance. The doors opened. My mother stepped out, wearing a tailored beige trench coat, holding a designer handbag in the crook of her arm. Alyssa emerged from the passenger side, holding a clipboard and wearing a smug, radiant smile. They stood together on the walkway, looking up at the historic brick facade of Oakwood Manor. Alyssa pointed toward the outdoor terrace, clearly visualizing where her high society guests would sip champagne. They looked like royalty surveying their newly conquered kingdom. They strutted up the stone steps, acting as if they owned the very ground they walked on. I watched them push open the heavy oak doors and disappear inside the venue. They were walking into a building they had no legal right to use. They were preparing to plan a party on a date that no longer existed on the calendar, and because of the privacy protocol I just established, the venue staff would simply smile, offer them a generic brochure, and refuse to confirm a single detail about their assumed reservation. A cold satisfaction settled deep in my chest. For 29 years, they had treated me like a stepping stone. Today, I simply removed myself from the path and let them step on thin air. I put my car in gear and drove out of the estate, leaving them behind in their own delusion. My phone buzzed against the center console, the screen illuminated with a text message from my father. "Michelle," he wrote, "we need you at the house tonight for a family meeting. Since you are delaying your wedding, we need to discuss reallocating the catering fund. Be here at 7. I stared at the glowing text at the stoplight. The trap at the venue was set, but they were already moving to steal the remaining funds I supposedly had left. The game was far from over. I parked my sedan along the immaculate curb of my parents' McLean property exactly at 7 o'clock. The neighborhood street lamps cast a warm, golden glow over the manicured lawns. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the shadows stretch across the brick pathway leading to their front door. I took a slow, steady breath. The trap at Oakwood Manor was operational. Now I needed to face the next phase of their extraction. When I walked into the house, the scent of lemon furniture polish and roasted garlic filled the foyer. My mother sat in the formal living room, perched on the edge of a cream-colored armchair, stirring a cup of chamomile tea. My father occupied the leather sofa opposite her. A thick manila folder rested on his lap. He tapped his pen against the cardboard edge, a nervous habit he developed whenever he prepared to discuss household finances. "Take a seat, Michelle," my father instructed, gesturing toward the empty chair across from him. I sat down, keeping my posture relaxed, offering no defensive body language. I folded my hands softly in my lap. "Your mother and I have been discussing the timeline," he began, clearing his throat. "Since you gracefully agreed to surrender October 14th to your sister, your own event is now pushed into the indefinite future. Next spring, perhaps next summer. We appreciate your flexibility." I offered a shallow, practiced nod. "Of course." "The issue at hand is capital," my father continued, leaning forward. "Alyssa and Preston need to secure vendors immediately. Catering for 300 distinguished guests requires an immense upfront deposit. The Cole family is handling the floral arrangements and the string quartet, but the culinary expenses fall on the bride's family. That is traditional." I saw the pivot coming before he even finished his sentence. "I took a $10,000 loan against my retirement account to fund your catering," he said, looking down at his manila folder rather than meeting my eyes. "Since your wedding is delayed, holding that capital in a savings account makes zero financial sense. We are reallocating those funds to Alyssa today. When you finally pick a new date next year, we can revisit your budget." He tried to dress it up in sterile economic terms, reallocating funds, revisiting budgets. The reality was much simpler. They were stealing the money they had proudly promised me, transferring it directly to the Golden Child to fund a party designed to impress strangers. My mother took a slow sip of her tea. "We know you understand, Michelle. You have always been the practical one. Alyssa needs this gala to reflect her new social standing." For a fraction of a second, the old, ingrained urge to argue flared in my chest. I wanted to remind them that I earned my own living, that I never asked for their money, and that taking it back felt like a calculated punishment. But the cybersecurity architect in my mind silenced the wounded daughter. Fighting them would only reveal my strength. I needed them to believe I was entirely broken. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice soft and defeated. "It makes logical sense." My father blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of resistance. He had prepared for a debate. Instead, I handed him a total surrender. "Just so we keep everything organized," I added, pulling my phone from my pocket, "I am sending you both an email right now. I am officially releasing you from the $10,000 catering pledge. This way, we have a clear paper trail and no one owes anyone anything." I typed the message in seconds and hit send. Their phones chimed simultaneously on the coffee table. I had just documented their withdrawal of financial support in writing. They thought I was being helpful. I was actually insulating myself. When the final bill came due for Alyssa, they could never claim they were withholding funds to pay for my wedding. I had formally cut the financial cord. I stood up, smoothing the front of my slacks. "If that is all, I have to get back to Alexandria. I have an early morning audit tomorrow." They let me leave without a single protest. They had extracted what they wanted. 2 days later, I needed to deploy a diversion. My family felt victorious, but arrogant people are often suspicious if things seem too easy. I had to feed their ego. I needed them to see physical proof of my submission. In strategic deception, this is known as a red herring. You give the target a piece of false intelligence that perfectly aligns with their own biases, cementing their blind confidence. I spent my lunch hour researching the lowest-rated event spaces in Northern Virginia. I found a place called the Crestview Community Center. The online gallery featured drop ceilings, fluorescent tube lighting, and faded burgundy carpets that looked sticky even through a computer screen. It was a bleak municipal hall located next to a discount tire shop. I requested a glossy pricing brochure and had it expedited to my apartment. On Thursday evening, I invited Alyssa and my mother over to my place. I told them I had a box of bridal magazines I no longer needed, and Alyssa could use them for inspiration. Before they arrived, I carefully placed the Crestview Community Center brochure right in the center of my kitchen island. I angled it perfectly under the pendant lights. I set a highlighter and a notepad next to it, making it look like I had been actively studying the dismal buffet packages. The buzzer rang at exactly 6. I let them up. Alyssa walked into my apartment wearing a designer trench coat, carrying a leather tote bag. My mother followed, her eyes immediately scanning my modest living room for dust or clutter. "The magazines are in the kitchen," I said, gesturing toward the counter. Alyssa walked over, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She reached for the stack of heavy bridal publications. As she pulled the top magazine toward her, her gaze dropped to the glossy brochure resting on the island. She paused. Her manicured fingers picked up the pamphlet. She read the bold letters across the top. Crestview Community Center. A sharp, unmistakable smirk broke across her face. She held the brochure up, turning to our mother. "Oh my gosh," Alyssa laughed, the sound bright and cruel. "Mom, look at this." My mother walked over, adjusting her glasses. She peered at the photos of the faded burgundy carpet and the sad, folded metal chairs. A look of profound pity settled over her features. "Michelle, sweetie," my mother sighed, placing a hand over her heart, "is this what you are looking at for your new date? This place has linoleum floors." I looked down at the floor, practicing my best impression of a humiliated bride. "It fits the new budget," I muttered, wrapping my arms around my torso. "Since the $10,000 is gone, Ethan and I have to be realistic. We cannot afford Loudoun County anymore." Alyssa tossed the brochure back onto the counter like it was a piece of trash. "Well, you have to do what you have to do," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Not everyone can host a luxury event. You guys are so practical. It really suits you." Their arrogance locked into place, solid and immovable. They had seen my supposed defeat with their own eyes. I was the poor, struggling sister settling for a municipal hall, while Alyssa ascended to the elite class. They would never suspect I was plotting anything else. They felt too vastly superior to look down and check the ground beneath their feet. Alyssa leaned against my kitchen counter, practically vibrating with excitement. "I actually brought my laptop," she announced, pulling a sleek silver device from her tote bag. "I wanted to show you the vendors I am securing for Oakwood Manor. Since you are not busy planning your own thing right now, you can appreciate the scale of what Preston and I are putting together." She opened the screen and turned it toward me. "I am booking a Parisian floral designer," she boasted, pointing to a gallery of towering imported orchids. "And I found a bespoke culinary team from Washington. They specialize in multi-course plated dinners. The tasting menu alone is $200 per person." I stared at the screen, analyzing the numbers rapidly forming in my head. A bespoke caterer for 300 guests, imported orchids. The total cost was astronomical. "How are you covering the upfront deposits?" I asked softly, maintaining my role as the passive observer. Alyssa reached into her wallet and pulled out a shiny premium credit card, tapping it against the marble counter. "I put $12,000 on this card just this morning," she declared proudly. "Preston's parents are contributing to the honeymoon later, so I am handling the logistical retainers now. It is an investment in our social standing. You have to spend money to secure the best dates." I watched her slide the credit card back into her designer wallet. She was doing it. She was building a colossal logistical house of cards. She was signing binding financial agreements, putting thousands of dollars of high-interest debt under her own name to furnish an event space that had already locked her out. She was buying expensive furniture for a house that was scheduled for demolition. "That sounds incredible, Alyssa," I said, forcing a warm, supportive tone. "You are really going all out." "I have to," she replied, zipping her tote bag closed. "When you claim a venue like Oakwood Manor, you cannot cut corners. You have to commit entirely." She had no idea how deeply she was committing herself to her own ruin. They left my apartment 20 minutes later, carrying the box of bridal magazines, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and unearned triumph. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up the Crestview Community Center brochure. I tossed it straight into the recycling bin. With the $10,000 officially gone and my family entirely convinced of my defeat, the diversion was a complete success. I finally had the cover I needed. It was time to execute the pivot and plan the real wedding Ethan and I truly deserved. Friday morning, Ethan and I walked hand in hand down the uneven cobblestone sidewalks of Old Town Alexandria. The autumn air carried the faint, salty tang of the Potomac River mixed with roasting coffee from a nearby corner cafe. We bypassed the busy storefronts and turned down a quiet residential lane, stopping in front of a historic archive building. The moment we stepped through the heavy wrought iron doors, my chronic shoulder tension melted away. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes spanning 3 centuries. Brass reading lamps cast pools of warm amber light across polished oak tables. The space smelled of beeswax, aged parchment, and quiet endurance. "This is it," Ethan whispered, his voice echoing softly against the vaulted ceiling. "It is better than Oakwood." He was right. Oakwood Manor was a sprawling stage designed for theatrical performances of wealth. This library was a sanctuary. It demanded authenticity. We met with the curator, a gentleman named Lawrence. He reviewed the calendar. October 14th remained open. The booking fee cost a fraction of my previous Loudoun County deposit. I handed him my debit card, watching the transaction process with a profound sense of relief. We capped the guest list at 40 people. There would be no state senators or corporate partners. We invited our closest friends and Ethan's family. His mother, Diane, had called me the night before, her tone radiating genuine warmth. She did not ask about the status of the venue or the social caliber of the attendees. She simply asked what my favorite cake flavor was so she could practice baking it. The contrast between her nurturing spirit and my own mother's calculating ambition struck a deep chord inside my chest. By scaling down the event, our financial spreadsheet transformed. The money we saved from feeding 300 strangers was immediately reallocated. Ethan and I booked 2 weeks in a cliffside villa along the Amalfi Coast. We traded a stressful, performative gala for European sunsets and uninterrupted peace. My real wedding was secure. Now I just had to maintain my cover in the fake one. The following Saturday, I found myself sitting on a velvet sofa inside a high-end bridal boutique in Tyson's Galleria. The showroom was an exercise in excess, featuring crystal chandeliers, mirrored walls, and racks of imported silk. I held a flute of complimentary champagne, playing my designated role as the supportive, quiet sister. Alyssa stood on a circular pedestal in the center of the room, draped in a heavily beaded gown that caught the light with every subtle movement. My mother circled her, adjusting the train, her eyes wide with unhidden reverence. "She looks like royalty," Nancy breathed, clasping her hands together. Sitting on the sofa opposite me was Victoria Cole, Preston's mother. Victoria embodied generational Virginia wealth. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored cashmere sweater and pearl earrings that had likely been passed down through 3 generations. She did not fuss over the dress. She observed the fitting with the sharp, calculating gaze of a seasoned investor evaluating a high-risk asset. A sales associate rushed over, carrying a velvet tray sparkling with crystal belts and rhinestone tiaras. She held up a glittering sash against Alyssa's waist. "It catches the light beautifully," the associate offered, flashing an eager smile. "It adds a touch of modern glamour." Victoria lowered her teacup. The porcelain clicked sharply against the saucer. "Remove that," Victoria instructed, her tone devoid of warmth. "We do not do rhinestones." The sales associate froze, her smile faltering. "I apologize, Mrs. Cole. I thought the bride might want something that stands out." Victoria leaned back, crossing her legs. Things that stand out are usually trying to distract you from what they lack. Rhinestones are for new money climbing the social ladder. I have zero tolerance for individuals who fabricate their assets to fit into rooms where they do not belong. Wealth is quiet. Lies are loud. The temperature in the showroom plummeted. I took a slow sip of my champagne, letting the crisp bubbles burst against my tongue. My eyes darted to Alyssa. Her posture stiffened on the pedestal. A faint flush of pink crept up her neck, disappearing into her hairline. Victoria's words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. She despised social climbers. She hated financial deception. Alyssa was currently funding this entire bridal fantasy on high-interest credit cards. She had lied to the Cole family, claiming she paid for Oakwood Manor up front. She was building an elaborate facade of financial equality, terrified that Preston's parents would discover she was just a subsidized public relations assistant drowning in debt. The pieces clicked into place inside my mind, forming a flawless geometric pattern. When the trap at Oakwood Manor finally sprang, the loss of the venue would be embarrassing, but the ensuing fallout would be lethal. The cancellation would expose the fact that Alyssa never held the contract. It would force the vendors to demand their payments, revealing her catastrophic credit card debt. Victoria Cole would witness the exact type of financial fabrication she fundamentally despised, unfolding in front of her 300 elite guests. My sister's penchant for lying was not just an annoyance, it was the specific mechanism of her impending destruction. "I think the plain silk sash is much more elegant," I chimed in, offering a warm, helpful smile. "We want to keep everything authentic." Victoria turned her head, acknowledging me for the first time that afternoon. She gave a curt, approving nod. "Your sister has a good eye, Alyssa. You should listen to her." Alyssa forced a tight, rigid smile. "Of course. Michelle is always helpful." The fitting dragged on for another hour. Alyssa debated the merits of imported lace versus hand-stitched tulle, stressing over every microscopic detail. I watched her spiral into a self-induced panic over napkin rings and floral centerpieces. She was exhausted, stretched thin by the sheer logistical weight of planning a massive society gala by herself. By the time we left the boutique and stepped out into the humid Virginia afternoon, Alyssa was visibly fraying. She paced the sidewalk outside the mall, rubbing her temples while staring at her phone. "The caterer needs a finalized floor plan by Tuesday," Alyssa snapped, her voice shrill with rising panic. "The lighting company will not confirm the drapery order until they speak with the venue director. I cannot do all of this. I have dress fittings and seating charts and Preston's mother breathing down my neck." She turned to me, her eyes wide with desperate expectation. "You are a project manager," she demanded, skipping right over the word please. "You do logistics for the government. I need you to step in and coordinate these vendors. I am too stressed to handle the administrative details." I stood on the pavement, feeling the warm breeze rustle the leaves of the nearby oak trees. I looked at my sister, watching her hand me the very weapon I needed to finalize the operation. "Send me the vendor contracts," I replied, my voice steady and accommodating. "I will take over the coordination today." My home office smelled of roasted espresso and ozone. Rain lashed against the window pane of my Arlington apartment, casting gray, fractured light across my dual monitors. On a typical Sunday morning, these screens displayed encrypted government networks, lines of code, and security audits. Today, they displayed something far more dangerous. They displayed my sister's wedding logistics. Alyssa had forwarded me 72 separate emails. The sheer volume of correspondence was staggering. There were catering quotes, floral design mock-ups, lighting schematics, and rental agreements for imported velvet chairs. She had dumped the entire organizational burden into my lap, assuming my project management skills were hers to exploit. She demanded I sort the chaos, citing her own exhaustion from simply selecting napkin colors. I accepted the job without a single word of protest. In the realm of cybersecurity, there is a specific type of infiltration known as a man-in-the-middle attack. The concept is elegant. An attacker secretly intercepts and relays communications between two parties who believe they are speaking directly to each other. The attacker controls the flow of information, altering or approving data without either original party realizing the deception. I was about to execute a flawless administrative man-in-the-middle operation. The primary logistical hurdle was venue approval. High-end vendors do not operate in a vacuum. A bespoke caterer needs to confirm the loading dock dimensions. A luxury lighting crew must secure approval for electrical rigging. Usually, these vendors call the venue director directly. If any of Alyssa's vendors called the real Oakwood Manor, Valerie would inform them that no such event existed. The entire illusion would shatter prematurely. I could not let that happen. I opened the dummy email account I had created days ago. The inbox sat empty, waiting for traffic. I opened my primary email and began replying to the vendors on Alyssa's behalf. I introduced myself as Michelle Lee, the event coordinator for the upcoming Cole Engagement Gala. I informed them that the bride was stepping back from logistical planning to focus on personal matters. Then, I typed the most critical sentence of the operation. For all venue-related approvals, load-in schedules, and floor plan sign-offs, please direct your correspondence to the Oakwood Manor Director at her dedicated event email, and I provided the fake address. To ensure the vendors did not attempt to call the venue by phone, I logged into the dummy account and crafted a meticulous auto-signature for my fake Valerie persona. I added the official Oakwood Manor logo, copied from their public website. Below the title of Venue Director, I typed a polite but firm directive. Please note that due to peak wedding season, I am frequently on site managing live events. For the most efficient response and to maintain a proper paper trail, please direct all logistical inquiries to this email address rather than the main office phone line. It was a classic social engineering tactic. I gave them a logical reason to avoid picking up the phone. People inherently follow the path of least resistance. If emailing guaranteed a faster response, they would email. Within an hour, the trap caught its first query. An email arrived in the fake Valerie inbox from Antoine, the Parisian floral designer Alyssa had bragged about. Antoine needed written authorization to suspend a heavy installation of imported orchids from the ballroom ceiling. I toggled over to the dummy account. I adopted the professional, accommodating tone of a seasoned venue director. I replied to Antoine, assuring him the ceiling trusses were rated for the required weight and attaching a generic ballroom schematic I had downloaded from the venue's public gallery. I typed Valerie at the bottom and hit send. 10 minutes later, the bespoke culinary team emailed, asking to confirm the kitchen prep area dimensions. I replied as Valerie, granting full approval for their requested footprint. The illusion held. The vendors felt secure. They were marching forward, ordering supplies, securing staffing, and reserving rental equipment for an event space that had already locked its doors to them. But orchestrating the logistics was only the first half of the equation. The second half required binding Alyssa to the financial reality of her own vanity. I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon reviewing the master service agreements from every vendor. Alyssa had selected premium packages across the board. The caterer required $22,000. The floral installation ran $12,000. The lighting, draped ceilings, and string quartet added another $11,000. I read through the liability clauses with the scrutiny of a federal auditor. Most vendors require a guarantor, someone to foot the bill if the primary client defaults. Often, parents step in to sign these contracts. I could not allow Brian or Nancy to put their names on these documents. If my parents assumed the financial burden, Alyssa would escape the consequences entirely. I drafted a consolidated summary of the contracts, formatting it to look like a standard corporate approval form. I highlighted the signature lines in bright yellow. I made sure my own name was entirely scrubbed from the financial guarantor sections, listing myself strictly as an unpaid administrative liaison. I designated Alyssa Lee as the sole signatory, the sole financial beneficiary, and the only individual legally responsible for the non-refundable balances due 30 days prior to the event. Tuesday evening, Alyssa arrived at my apartment to finalize the paperwork. She wore expensive athletic clothes, clutching an iced matcha latte, looking deeply inconvenienced by the errand. She dropped her designer purse onto my kitchen island and sighed heavily. "I am so drained," she complained, leaning against the marble counter. "Preston's mother wants to review the seating chart again. I do not understand why the caterer needs so many signatures. Can you just summarize it for me?" I slid the neat stack of printed contracts across the island. I handed her a sleek blue pen. It is standard procedure, I said, keeping my voice soothing and deferential. The vendors just need to lock in the final liability terms before they order your custom inventory. Mom and Dad offered to sign as guarantors, but I told the vendors you preferred to handle the primary contracts yourself. I figured you wanted your name on the master file, especially since the Cole family is so particular about financial independence. Alyssa took the bait instantly. Her posture straightened. You were right to do that, she agreed, her tone shifting into haughty confidence. Preston's parents respect autonomy. If they saw Mom and Dad co-signing my event contracts, they would treat me like a child. I am managing this myself. She did not read a single line of the fine print. She flipped straight to the highlighted yellow sections. I watched her manicured hand guide the blue pen across the crisp white paper. The scratching sound of the ink binding her to the page echoed in the quiet kitchen. She signed the catering agreement. She signed the floral contract. She signed the lighting and rental manifests. With every stroke of the pen, she anchored herself to tens of thousands of dollars in debt. She was legally promising to pay for goods and services that would eventually be delivered to a locked gate. There was no escape clause for negligence. There was no refund policy for failing to secure the venue. I collected the signed documents, tapping the edges against the counter to align them perfectly. A deep, cold satisfaction settled in my chest. Thank you for handling the boring administrative stuff, Michelle, she said, taking a long sip of her drink. I know you do not have much else going on right now since your own plans are on hold. It gives you something to do. I slipped the contracts into a manila folder. It is my pleasure, I replied. I will send these back to the vendors in the morning. Alyssa left shortly after, complaining about traffic on the Beltway. I stood alone in my kitchen, resting my hand on the manila folder. The bomb was officially armed. The financial liability rested entirely on her shoulders. I walked back to my home office and scanned the signed documents into my encrypted hard drive, filing them away in the folder named Receipts. Just as I closed the program, my personal phone vibrated on the desk. An automated email arrived from the caterer. They required the final guest head count and the last deposit authorization by Friday. I forwarded the message directly to Alyssa's phone, pushing the final logistical trigger into her hands. My phone vibrated again, this time a text message from Ethan. He was out having a drink with a former college roommate who ran in the same Virginia social circles as the Cole family. We need to talk when I get home, Ethan wrote. His text lacked his usual warmth. I just heard a very strange story about why you postponed our wedding. People are talking, Michelle, and they are not saying kind things. I stared at the glowing screen. The administrative trap was locked, but my sister was already moving to destroy my reputation before the event even began. Ethan walked through the front door of our apartment just before midnight. The deadbolt clicked shut with a heavy metallic thud. He did not take off his jacket. He walked straight into the living room, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched beneath his skin. I sat on the sofa with my laptop resting on my knees, watching his chest rise and fall with rigid breaths. What is wrong? I asked, closing the computer screen. He paced the length of the rug, running a hand through his hair. I met Greg for drinks in Clarendon, he began, his voice low and vibrating with restrained fury. Greg works in commercial real estate. He runs in the same social circles as Preston Cole. He asked me how you were holding up. I sat forward. Holding up from what? Ethan stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were dark with protective anger. Greg heard a story at a networking luncheon yesterday. The story was that you were drowning in debt, that you could not afford Oakwood Manor, and you broke down crying at a family dinner. According to the rumor, you begged Alyssa to take over the venue contract to save you from financial ruin and public embarrassment. Greg thought my teacher's salary could not cover the deposit, so Alyssa swooped in like a hero to bail us out. A cold sensation washed over my skin. Alyssa was not just stealing my venue, she was actively rewriting history to elevate her own status while dragging my name through the mud. In the wealthy enclaves of Northern Virginia, reputation functions as currency. By casting me as the destitute, failing older sister, she painted herself as the wealthy, benevolent savior to her future in-laws. Ethan reached for his car keys on the counter. I am driving to McLean. I am going to wake your father up and demand he fix this. They are dragging your professional reputation through the dirt to impress a bunch of country club snobs. I will not let them humiliate you like this. I stood up, stepping directly into his path. I placed both hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart through his shirt. "Ethan, look at me." He shook his head, his knuckles white as he gripped the keys. "Michelle, this crosses a line. If her future in-laws believe this, if your mutual friends believe this, you look like a failure. It is character assassination." "I know," I said gently, "but you are not going to McLean. You are going to sit down." I guided him back to the sofa. He sat, rigid and reluctant. I picked up my laptop and opened the screen. I navigated to the encrypted folder labeled Receipts. I opened the scanned PDF files I had secured just a few hours prior. "Look at these," I instructed, turning the screen toward him. Ethan leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he read the highlighted text. "These are the master service agreements for the caterer, the florist, and the lighting crew." "Look at the signature line," I directed. "Look at the financial guarantor section." He traced his finger across the trackpad, scrolling down the page. He stopped. He read the name. Alyssa Lee. She signed for all of it. "She is legally bound to over $45,000 in services," I explained, keeping my voice clinical and detached. "She signed these documents tonight. She did not read the fine print. She assumed she was acting like a wealthy socialite, commanding vendors. She anchored herself to a mountain of high-interest debt for a venue that will turn her away at the door." Ethan stared at the screen, the anger in his eyes slowly transforming into a stunned realization. "But the rumors," he protested weakly, "the lies she is telling people." "The lies are not a threat, Ethan. The lies are the trap." I sat beside him, folding my hands in my lap. "Think about Victoria Cole. Think about Preston's mother. She despises social climbers. She hates financial deception. Right now, Alyssa is telling the Virginia elite that she is rich enough to bail out her older sister. She is setting an expectation of immense generational wealth. When the truth comes out, when she arrives at Oakwood Manor and discovers she has no venue, the entire illusion will shatter." I let the weight of the strategy sink into the quiet room. "If you confront my parents tonight," I continued, "Alyssa will play the victim. She will cry. She will claim you misunderstood the rumor. My parents will defend her. They will warn her that we are angry, and she might actually call the venue to double-check her reservations. We cannot spook the target. We have to let her walk into the snare." Ethan looked at me. The tension left his shoulders, replaced by a quiet, profound awe. He closed the laptop. "You are letting her build her own guillotine." I nodded. "She is supplying the wood. She is sharpening the blade. I am just watching her work." The next 2 weeks tested my endurance. The rumor spread rapidly through our extended network. Distant cousins sent me sympathetic text messages, offering me small loans to help cover my supposedly ruined wedding. Former high school classmates looked at me with thinly veiled pity when I ran into them at the grocery store. My mother even played into the narrative, calling me on a Tuesday afternoon to suggest I look into a courthouse wedding to save my non-existent finances. I swallowed the pride rising in my throat. I answered every text with a polite, vague deflection. I thanked my mother for her practical advice. I played the role of the defeated, broke sibling to perfection. Every pitying look was a deposit into the eventual payoff. The point of no return arrived on a brisk Thursday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing a defense contract when a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. I carried it inside and sliced the thick paper open with a kitchen knife. Inside rested a letterpress invitation, bordered in gold foil. The cursive font announced the grand engagement gala of Alyssa Lee and Preston Cole. The location was listed proudly at the bottom, Oakwood Manor. The date was October 14th. I traced the raised gold lettering with my index finger. Alyssa had not just printed these for family. She had mailed 300 of these envelopes to state politicians, real estate developers, and corporate executives across the eastern seaboard. 300 prominent members of the Virginia elite now held physical proof of her scheduled event. The invitation sealed her fate. There was no backing out now. She had broadcasted her lie to the highest echelons of her social circle. She had invited the most powerful people she knew to witness her triumph. Instead, they were all going to witness her public execution. I pinned the gold foil invitation to the corkboard above my desk. It hung there like a trophy. The administrative phase of my operation was officially complete. The logistical trap was locked. The financial liability was secured. The social stakes were raised to an astronomical height. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was a calendar notification. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for tomorrow evening. Nancy had rented a private room at an upscale steakhouse in Reston. The Cole family would be in attendance. It would be the final gathering before the main event, a night dedicated to toasting Alyssa's brilliant planning and social ascension. I turned off my computer monitors and stared into the dark reflective glass. I was ready to attend that dinner. I was ready to watch them celebrate their stolen victory, knowing that the countdown timer had already reached 0. The private dining room at the upscale Reston Steakhouse smelled of charred oak, dry-aged beef, and melted butter. Low, recessed amber lighting cast long shadows across the heavy mahogany table. My mother had orchestrated the seating arrangement weeks in advance, carefully engineering a visual representation of the impending merger between the Lee and Cole families. Preston and Alyssa occupied the epicenter of the room. They were flanked by Victoria Cole and her husband, a man who spoke primarily in golf handicaps and quarterly market yields. I was positioned at the extreme end of the long table. The swinging kitchen door brushed the back of my chair every time a waiter emerged, carrying silver trays of oysters and crab cakes. The message required no translation. Ethan and I were required attendees, not honored guests. I watched the social dynamic unfold over the first 2 courses. Victoria Cole dictated the pace of the evening. When she set her fork down, the waiters magically materialized to clear everyone else's plates. Alyssa mirrored Victoria's every subtle movement, sipping her sparkling water only when the older woman did, laughing a fraction of a second after Victoria delivered a dry observation. Dessert arrived, bringing small porcelain ramekins of crème brûlée. My father stood up from his chair. He picked up his silver butter knife and tapped it rhythmically against his crystal water goblet. The clear, ringing sound cut through the ambient jazz playing from the overhead speakers. Conversations halted. Faces turned toward the head of the table. My father adjusted the lapels of his suit jacket, offering a warm, expansive smile toward the Cole family. "If I may have everyone's attention," he began, his voice carrying a practiced, authoritative cadence. Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, I reached into my purse. I unlocked my smartphone and opened the voice recording application. My thumb hovered over the red circle. "We are gathered tonight to celebrate the union of 2 wonderful families," my father continued, raising his glass toward Preston's parents. "But I primarily want to take a moment to speak about my youngest daughter, Alyssa." I tapped the red button. The digital timer began ticking upward on my screen. 0 minutes and 3 seconds. "Planning a significant event requires vision," he declared, his chest swelling with pride. "It requires leadership. When the opportunity arose to secure Oakwood Manor, arguably the premier estate in all of Loudoun County, Alyssa demonstrated incredible initiative and grace. She stepped into a difficult logistical situation and transformed it into a triumph. She ensured this gathering would reflect the high standards both our families value." He did not look in my direction. He did not mention my initial deposit, my rigorous saving, or the fact that I was the original architect of the reservation. In his revised historical narrative, Alyssa was the resourceful heroine who salvaged a prestigious venue from uncertainty. He was presenting her as a competent, wealthy equal to the Cole dynasty, erasing my contribution entirely to elevate her status. To Alyssa and Preston, my father toasted, lifting his wine higher into the ambient light. "May your future be as bright and flawless as the gala you have engineered for this weekend." The table erupted in polite applause. Victoria Cole offered a rare, approving nod. Alyssa beamed, her cheeks flushed with the glow of unearned praise. Beneath the table, I pressed stop. The file saved automatically to my encrypted cloud drive. The audio evidence of his lie was pristine, secured safely in my digital folder. Ethan leaned close to my ear, his voice barely a whisper over the clatter of dessert spoons striking porcelain. "He really believes it," Ethan observed, shaking his head. "He actually convinced himself she did the hard work." "People believe whatever is most convenient for their ego," I whispered back, taking a calm bite of my dessert. The burnt sugar crust shattered perfectly between my teeth. The dinner concluded an hour later. The guests stood, mingling in small clusters, sipping after dinner cordials. Ethan went to retrieve our coats from the cloakroom. I picked up my leather tote bag from the floor. It was time for the final administrative transfer. I retrieved a thick black 3-ring binder from my bag. It weighed nearly 5 pounds, packed with high-grade printer paper, tab dividers, and notarized ink. I carried it across the room, navigating around the clusters of laughing relatives and half-empty wine glasses. Alyssa stood near the private bar, accepting compliments on her white silk cocktail dress from a distant cousin of Preston's. I waited for a lull in the conversation before stepping forward into her line of sight. "Alyssa," I said, offering a serene, accommodating expression, "I have something for you." I placed the binder onto the polished granite surface of the bar. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. The sound resonated in my ears like a vault door clicking shut. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the black spine with mild distaste, as if I had handed her a piece of junk mail. "These are the finalized vendor contracts," I explained, keeping my tone bright and helpful. "The bespoke caterer, the Parisian floral designer, the lighting crew, and the luxury rental agency. Every document is signed, verified, and legally bound. My duties as your administrative coordinator are officially complete. All that remains is for you to enjoy your party on Saturday." Alyssa ran a manicured hand over the plastic cover. She did not open the binder. She did not review the highlighted liability clauses or the towering invoice totals nested within the protective sleeves. To her, it was just tedious paperwork she had successfully outsourced to her mundane older sister. "Great," she replied, picking up her espresso cup. "Thanks for sorting the boring details, Michelle. I will hand this over to Preston's assistant tomorrow so they can handle the final vendor gratuities." She turned away, immediately rejoining a conversation about the weather forecast for the weekend. She offered no genuine gratitude, only the casual dismissal of a superior releasing a subordinate from their shift. I stood at the bar for a long moment, staring at the black binder resting inches from her elbow. Inside those plastic sleeves lay $45,000 of inescapable debt. Because she refused to read the fine print, she had no idea the financial guarantor lines held only her name. When the venue rejected her vendors, the strict cancellation penalties would trigger instantly. She was holding a live grenade, entirely unaware that the pin was already pulled. I looked across the dimly lit room at my parents. My father was rubbing his lower back, a grimace of pain flashing across his aging face before he quickly masked it with a smile. My mother was adjusting her silk scarf, her eyes tired and strained beneath her immaculate makeup. A sudden, visceral pang constricted my throat. The breath caught in my lungs. They were getting older. They were banking their entire social and financial security on this single illusion. When the trap snapped shut, the shockwave would obliterate their pristine Loudoun County facade. It would expose their favoritism, their theft, and their lies to the exact people they worshipped. It would break them in a way they could never repair. For 5 seconds, a dangerous surge of guilt urged me to grab the binder back. My heart pounded against my ribs. I wanted to pull the fire alarm. I wanted to warn them before the train derailed off the cliff. Then, I remembered the $10,000 vanish from my catering fund. I remembered the glossy brochure for the run-down municipal hall they used to mock my future. I remembered the endless years of parking on the street, taking the smaller slice, shrinking my own life so my sister could expand hers without facing a single ounce of resistance. The guilt evaporated, replaced by cold, hardened steel. They chose this path. I simply paved it for them. Ethan appeared at my side, draping my wool coat over my shoulders. He looked at the heavy binder sitting on the granite bar, then up at my face. "Is it done?" he asked quietly. "It is done," I answered, sliding my arms into my coat sleeves. We walked out of the private dining room, leaving the celebration behind. The crisp autumn air hit my face the moment we exited the steakhouse. The sky above Reston was clear, scattered with cold, distant stars. The logistical snare was tied. The financial anchor was fastened. In less than 48 hours, the Oakwood Manor automated system would deploy the final notification, signaling the beginning of the end. Thursday morning arrived with a crisp, biting chill. The countdown timer in my mind clicked down to 48 hours. I sat on the floor of my Arlington living room, surrounded by brown cardboard boxes and rolls of clear packing tape. At precisely 9 o'clock, my phone vibrated against the bare hardwood floor. I picked up the device. A system-generated notification flashed across the screen. It originated from the Oakwood Manor automated scheduling software. Because I had retained sole digital access to the client portal, the venue servers sent the standard 48-hour courtesy follow-up directly to my primary inbox. The subject line read, "Event cancellation confirmation and final invoice void." The body of the text outlined standard corporate boilerplate. It confirmed that the October 14th reservation was officially wiped from their calendar and the space was secured for another client. I stared at the glowing letters. The temptation to delete the message and let the snare snap shut in total silence was strong. But true strategic deception requires testing the target's hubris one final time. I wanted to give my sister a single fleeting opportunity to save herself. I wanted to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that her vanity would blind her to a direct warning. I forwarded the automated message to Alyssa. I typed a brief, casual note above the forwarded text. "Hey, I just received this automated email from the venue software. It looks like their back-end registry is still glitching and sending out alerts regarding my old canceled booking. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case it cross-references your event details. Disregard it." I hit send and set the phone down. I returned to wrapping my ceramic coffee mugs in newsprint. 10 minutes later, my phone chimed with a reply. I swiped open the screen. "Ugh," Alyssa wrote. "Their information technology department is so outdated, I am deleting it. I am currently at the day spa getting a hot stone massage, and I cannot deal with administrative spam right now. Also, please remind the floral designer that the centerpieces must be alabaster white, not ivory. Victoria Cole hates ivory. It looks cheap." I read the text twice. A soft, breathless laugh escaped my lips. She held the literal blueprint of her impending doom in her hands, and she discarded it because it interrupted her spa treatment. She was more concerned with the specific hue of a flower that would never be delivered than the venue that was actively turning her away. I had given her a chance. She chose the hot stones. I tossed the phone into my purse and sealed the final cardboard box. Ethan walked into the living room, wiping a streak of dust from his forehead. He wore an old gray sweatshirt and faded denim, a stark contrast to the tailored suits my father and Preston paraded around in. Ethan was genuine. He carried a stack of flattened moving boxes under one arm. "Is that the last of it?" he asked, looking around the empty apartment. "That is everything," I replied, standing up and brushing off my knees. We were not just packing up my modest Arlington rental. We were erasing my physical footprint. Over the past 3 months, while my family obsessed over engagement galas and country club gossip, Ethan and I had quietly navigated the real estate market. We purchased a beautiful, historic brick home in a quiet neighborhood in Falls Church. The deed was signed, the mortgage secured, and the keys were already resting in Ethan's pocket. My parents knew nothing about the house. They knew nothing about our mortgage or our new neighborhood. If they knew, my mother would demand a spare key for emergencies. My father would drop by unannounced to inspect the landscaping and offer unsolicited critiques on the property value. They would plant their flag on our achievement and claim it as their own territory. By keeping the purchase hidden, we built a fortress they could never breach. I picked up my key ring and detached the brass apartment key. I walked down to the leasing office on the first floor and handed the metal token to the property manager. "Thank you for everything," I told the manager, signing the final move-out ledger. When I walked back out to the parking lot, the moving truck was locked and loaded. Ethan stood by the driver's side door, holding 2 cups of black coffee. He handed me one. The heat seeped through the cardboard sleeve, warming my cold fingers. "You officially do not exist on their map anymore," Ethan observed, a proud smile lifting the corners of his mouth. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. "I am a ghost." We drove the moving truck to the new house in Falls Church, unloading the boxes into the sunlit living room. We did not bother unpacking. That task could wait. Right now, we needed to establish our sanctuary before the Loudoun County blast wave hit. I ordered a rideshare vehicle to take us from our new, empty house to Old Town Alexandria. We had booked a suite at a luxury boutique hotel situated along the Potomac River. The cobblestone streets and historic gas lamps provided the perfect backdrop for our real wedding weekend. During the 20-minute drive to the hotel, my phone vibrated endlessly. Alyssa was sending a barrage of frantic, trivial demands. "Did you confirm the valet parking ratio?" she texted. And then 2 minutes later, Make sure the caterer knows Preston's father requires his tenderloin cooked medium rare, not medium. If there is even a hint of gray in that meat, he will send it back. I read the messages as the cityscape blurred past the car window. Her vanity was boundless. She was micromanaging the culinary preferences of a man who was about to experience the most profound public humiliation of his life. I did not reply to her texts. My duties as her unpaid coordinator were over. The hotel lobby smelled of fresh eucalyptus and cedar. We checked into our corner suite on the top floor. The room featured heavy blackout curtains, plush velvet armchairs, and a sprawling king-size bed covered in crisp white linens. It was a soundproof vault of luxury and peace. Ethan dropped his overnight bag onto the luggage rack. He walked over to the minibar, retrieved a bottle of sparkling water, and twisted off the cap. "We are 48 hours out," he said, leaning against the polished wood cabinet. "How are you feeling?" I walked over to the nightstand. I reached into my purse and pulled out my primary cell phone. The screen displayed 3 new, unread messages from my mother, likely barking orders about rehearsal schedules or seating arrangements. "I feel lighter," I answered. I held the power button down. The screen prompted me to confirm the shutdown. I swiped my finger across the glass. The device vibrated once, the screen faded to black, and the connection severed. Ethan mirrored my action. He powered down his phone, ensuring no angry relatives could reach him through collateral channels. I opened the small electronic safe hidden inside the hotel closet. I placed both of our darkened devices onto the velvet shelf and closed the heavy steel door. I punched in a 4-digit code and heard the locking mechanism engage with a satisfying, heavy click. The silence in the hotel suite was immediate and profound. There were no buzzing alerts, there were no demanding ringtones, there were no frantic text messages about alabaster centerpieces or medium-rare tenderloins. We had officially vanished. While Alyssa spent the next 2 days polishing her designer shoes and boasting to her wealthy friends, she would be marching blindly toward a locked gate. She had built her entire identity around the prestige of Oakwood Manor, assuming her golden child status granted her immunity from logistics, contracts, and consequences. I walked over to the large suite window and pulled back the heavy drapes. The Potomac River flowed quietly below, reflecting the amber lights of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. The architecture of my new life was finally secure. I had erected the boundaries, reinforced the walls, and locked the gates. All that remained was to wait for the storm to break against the rocks. I was resting miles away in a quiet Alexandria hotel suite when the Loudoun County trap finally snapped shut. I did not witness the immediate fallout firsthand. However, the subsequent testimonies from stranded vendors, bewildered security personnel, and Preston himself painted a vivid, high-definition portrait of that afternoon. I know exactly how the disaster unfolded, down to the very last humiliating detail. At 3 o'clock, a pristine autumn sun bathed Oakwood Manor in a warm golden glow. A procession of chauffeured sedans and sleek sports cars turned onto the long tree-lined estate driveway. 300 of Virginia's most affluent socialites arrived expecting a flawless celebration. The vibrant autumn foliage provided a breathtaking backdrop of burnt orange and gold, a perfect setting for a high society gathering. Alyssa rode near the front of the motorcade in a rented vintage Rolls-Royce. She wore a bespoke designer gown costing upward of $5,000. The garment featured layers of imported silk, heavy beadwork, and a rigid boned corset that cinched her waist so tight she could barely draw a full breath. She purchased that dress specifically to project an aura of effortless generational wealth. Instead, that heavy, restrictive fabric functioned as a physical cage, trapping her inside her own manufactured illusion. The vintage car crunched to a halt near the grand portico. Alyssa stepped out, waiting for valets to open the doors. None appeared. No ushers stood ready with silver trays of champagne. Instead, a rustic wooden sign decorated with fresh sunflowers rested near the estate steps. Elegant calligraphy spelled out a clear, devastating message. "Welcome to the Martinez wedding." Alyssa hiked up her heavy silk skirt and marched across the manicured grass. A beautiful woman in a simple lace dress was posing for photographs beneath the old oak trees surrounded by bridesmaids in sage green gowns. A professional photographer circled them, snapping continuous pictures in the crisp afternoon light. Confusion rippled through the arriving guests. Preston stepped out of the car next to Alyssa, adjusting his tailored suit, his brow furrowing in deep irritation. Behind them, Victoria Cole and her husband emerged from their chauffeured town car. Victoria adjusted her cashmere wrap, her sharp eyes scanning the disorganized scene, registering the distinct lack of proper hospitality. Driven by decades of unchecked entitlement, Alyssa interrupted the photo shoot. Her voice shrill and echoing across the estate grounds, she demanded the bride leave her venue. She insisted her engagement gala started in exactly 1 hour, and her vendors needed to load in. The photographer lowered his camera. The bride turned around, her smile vanishing into a mask of pure bewilderment. The groomsmen stepped forward, forming a protective barrier around the bewildered couple. The groom explained they held the estate for the entire weekend and instructed Alyssa to return to her vehicle. "I am not confused," Alyssa shrieked, the panic finally bleeding through her haughty facade. "I am Alyssa Lee. I am marrying Preston Cole. We booked this date months ago." The commotion drew the attention of everyone in the parking lot. State politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and corporate executives stood frozen by their luxury vehicles, watching the bride-to-be throw a frantic tantrum on a stranger's lawn. Brian and Nancy scrambled out of their own vehicle, rushing across the gravel to intervene. My father's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. He operated under the assumption that volume and authority could fix any logistical error. He shouted for the venue director, demanding management rectify the clerical mistake immediately. The heavy oak doors of the manor swung open. Valerie stepped onto the stone portico wearing her signature navy suit, holding a sleek silver clipboard. She looked down at the chaotic scene unfolding on her pristine driveway. She did not look flustered. She looked like a professional executing a pre-planned protocol. My father pointed a trembling finger at the actual bride and groom. "Valerie, you need to remove these people from the premises immediately," he barked. "My daughter Michelle transferred this date to Alyssa. We have 300 distinguished guests waiting in the lot." Victoria Cole stepped forward, standing just behind my sister. Victoria's eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. She crossed her arms, waiting for the venue director to apologize for the profound inconvenience. Valerie walked down the stone steps, stopping a comfortable distance from my furious family. She consulted her clipboard, then looked directly at my father. "Sir, there is no clerical error," Valerie stated, her voice carrying clear and steady over the hushed crowd. "The Martinez family holds the exclusive contract for this estate today." "That is impossible," Alyssa gasped, clutching the heavy silk fabric of her corset. "Michelle gave me this date. I took over the reservation. I told everyone I paid for it." Valerie shifted her gaze to my sister. The venue director offered no warmth, only the sterile, crushing weight of reality. "Michelle Lee secured the original reservation," Valerie explained, addressing the entire crowd. "Michelle Lee paid the $15,000 deposit from her personal bank account. 3 months ago, Michelle Lee formally canceled her contract and absorbed the financial penalty. She revoked all secondary access to the file." A suffocating silence blanketed the gravel lot. The only sound was the rustling of the autumn leaves in the wind. Valerie continued, delivering the final fatal blow. "You never signed a contract with Oakwood Manor, Miss Lee. You never submitted a deposit. You are a stranger to this venue. I must ask you and your guests to vacate the property immediately before I call security." The illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. For weeks, Alyssa had paraded through the elite circles of Northern Virginia, spinning a calculated tale of her own benevolence. She told everyone I was destitute, drowning in debt, and begging for a bailout. She claimed she swooped in with superior wealth to rescue the reservation. Now, the truth lay bare on the gravel. I was the one who possessed the funds. I was the one who held the power. Alyssa was nothing but a fraud, wearing a dress she could not afford, standing in a parking lot she had no right to occupy. My mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. Nancy looked around at the crowd of distinguished guests, realizing decades of carefully curated social climbing had just evaporated in a matter of seconds. Every politician, every executive, every wealthy neighbor stared at them with undisguised pity and shock. Alyssa fell to her knees on the sharp stones. The heavy boning of her corset dug into her ribs, trapping her inside the expensive garment. She began to weep, loud, hysterical, ragged sobs that echoed across the estate. Her perfectly styled hair fell into her face, mixing with tears and expensive makeup. She reached out, grabbing the hem of Preston's tailored suit trousers. "Preston," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Preston, please, do something." Preston did not move to comfort her. He stared down at her, his expression caught between deep embarrassment and dawning horror. Victoria Cole stepped around the weeping girl. The matriarch of the Cole family looked down at Alyssa with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The one thing Victoria hated more than anything else was a social climber who fabricated their assets. She had warned Alyssa about the vulgarity of lies in the bridal boutique. "You lied to us," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a terrifying quiet register. "You lied about the venue. You lied about your finances. You lied about your own sister to make yourself look important." "Mrs. Cole, please," my mother begged, stepping forward with tears streaming down her face. "It is a misunderstanding. Michelle orchestrated this to hurt us." "Do not insult my intelligence," Victoria snapped, turning her freezing glare toward my parents. "Your daughter tried to play a game well above her station. We leaving." Victoria signaled to her husband. They turned their backs on my family, walking briskly toward their waiting town car. Preston lingered for a fraction of a second, looking at the weeping woman on the gravel. He gently pulled his pant leg free from Alyssa's desperate grasp. He did not speak a single word. He turned and followed his parents, closing the heavy car door behind him. The remaining guests took the cue. The fleet of luxury vehicles began executing clumsy three-point turns on the narrow driveway, desperate to escape the humiliating spectacle. My father stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing in silent shock. The realization of his own ruin settled over him. They stole my catering fund. They mocked my supposed municipal hall wedding. They treated me like disposable staff. Now, they were stranded on the edge of a wealthy estate, stripped of their pride, their future in-laws, and their social standing. As the last luxury sedan drove away, leaving my family alone in the dust, with the venue security guards closing in, the stage was set for the financial reckoning that would soon follow. The air inside the historic Alexandria Library tasted like aged paper and polished mahogany. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the vaulted stained glass windows, casting pools of ruby and sapphire light across the hardwood floor. There were no shrieking brides here. There were no furious politicians or humiliated real estate tycoons. The space held only 40 chairs, occupied by people who genuinely cared about the two of us standing at the altar. Ethan looked at me. His eyes reflected a deep, steady warmth. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, standing tall and relaxed. We held hands, our fingers intertwined. My dress was a simple, elegant sheath of ivory silk, light and unrestrictive. I could breathe deeply. I felt secure. The string quartet we hired consisted of just 2 violinists and a cellist, playing a soft acoustic melody that echoed gently off the 3-story-high bookshelves. Ethan's mother, Diane, sat in the front row, wiping a tear from her cheek with a lace handkerchief. She radiated pure joy. She had baked our tiered vanilla cake herself, setting it on a rustic wooden stand in the adjoining reading room. We exchanged our vows under the amber glow of the brass reading lamps. We promised to protect each other, to build a sanctuary together, and to honor the boundaries that kept our home safe. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Ethan kissed me, and the library erupted in genuine, joyful applause. Our guests did not care about social standing or elite catering. They cared about us. For the next 4 hours, we celebrated in the adjoining archive hall. We ate thick slices of vanilla cake, drank crisp champagne, and danced under the historic chandeliers. Nobody argued over napkin colors. Nobody demanded a specific temperature for their beef tenderloin. The evening unfolded with seamless, unforced perfection. The contrast between my serene reality and the chaotic disaster unfolding miles away in Loudoun County felt like stepping into a different dimension. By 9 o'clock, the reception wound down. Ethan and I said our goodbyes, thanking our chosen family for their presence. We walked hand in hand down the quiet cobblestone streets of Old Town, returning to our luxury hotel suite overlooking the Potomac River. The suite remained exactly as we had left it, a quiet vault of comfort. I kicked off my satin heels, feeling the plush carpet beneath my toes. Ethan removed his suit jacket, tossing it onto the velvet armchair. He walked over to the minibar and poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider, handing one to me. "Are you ready to look?" he asked, his voice calm, though a spark of anticipation danced in his eyes. I walked over to the steel safe hidden inside the closet. I punched in the 4-digit code. The heavy door clicked open. I retrieved my secondary phone, the one I had left powered down for the past 2 days. I walked back to the center of the room and sat on the edge of the king-sized bed. I held the power button. The screen illuminated, displaying the startup logo. It took a few seconds for the device to reconnect to the cellular network. When the signal bars appeared, the phone practically vibrated out of my hand. A relentless flood of notifications cascaded down the digital screen. The alert chimes stacked on top of each other, creating a chaotic, unbroken tone. I muted the volume, watching the numbers climb. 42 missed calls, 67 text messages, 14 voicemails. My father was the primary instigator, followed closely by my mother. I opened the messaging application. The timeline of their panic painted a vivid picture of their afternoon. The first message arrived at 3:15. "Michelle, where are you? The venue is locked. Some other couple is here. Call me right now." 10 minutes later, the tone shifted from confusion to anger. "Michelle, answer your phone. Valerie is saying you canceled the contract. What did you do? Alyssa is having a panic attack in the parking lot. The Cole family is leaving." By 4 o'clock, the demands escalated into desperation. "You need to come fix this. You need to call the venue and tell them it is a mistake." Preston broke off the engagement. His mother called us frauds in front of the senator. "You ruined your sister. You owe us for these damages." I read the words, analyzing their frantic syntax. There was no apology. There was no realization of their own cruelty. They still viewed me as the subordinate employee tasked with cleaning up their messes. They assumed a harsh directive would snap me back into compliance. They believed they still held authority over my life. Ethan sat beside me on the bed, reading the screen over my shoulder. He shook his head, taking a sip of his cider. "They still think they can order you around," he noted quietly. "They are about to learn how little power they have," I replied. I did not type an emotional paragraph. I did not explain my feelings or demand an apology. Engaging in a screaming match only gives a toxic person the friction they need to maintain a connection. The ultimate power move is sterile, documented silence. I opened my encrypted cloud drive. I selected a single, meticulously compiled PDF document. I had named the file Project Architecture. The document contained 20 pages of irrefutable evidence. The first page featured a chronological timeline of their text messages, highlighting the exact moment they stole my $10,000 catering fund. The second page contained the embedded audio file of my father delivering his rehearsal dinner toast, publicly erasing my contribution and claiming Alyssa orchestrated the Oakwood Manor booking. The third page displayed the official cancellation receipt from the venue, proving I owned the date and voided it legally. But the final 17 pages held the most devastating payload. I had attached high-resolution scans of every single master service agreement from the vendors, the caterer, the floral designer, the lighting crew, and the rental agency. I highlighted the financial guarantor section on every page in bright yellow. Alyssa Lee's signature sat clearly on every single dotted line. I attached the PDF to a new message thread containing both my mother and my father. I typed a single sentence to accompany the file. "My duties as administrative coordinator are officially concluded." I hit send. I watched the progress bar turn blue as the heavy document transmitted through the network. A small text notification popped up a second later, confirming the message was delivered. I did not wait for their response. I accessed the phone settings and navigated to the blocked contacts list. I added my father's number. I added my mother's number. I added my sister's number. I severed the digital cord, ensuring their ensuing rage would echo into a void they could never cross. Ethan leaned over and kissed my temple. "It is finished," he said softly. I set the phone on the nightstand. "Almost," I replied, turning to look at him. "The emotional boundary is set, but the financial snare is just starting to tighten." Before I blocked their numbers, I had read one final frantic text from my mother, sent just moments before I turned the phone on. It outlined the next phase of the disaster. The vendors had arrived at Oakwood Manor during the chaotic parking lot confrontation. 3 delivery trucks filled with imported orchids, custom lighting rigs, and thousands of dollars in perishable gourmet food had pulled up to the estate gates. When venue security turned the trucks away, the vendors immediately sought out the signatory of their contracts. My mother's text had been a desperate plea for funds. "The caterer is threatening to sue," she had written. "The floral designer says the perishable goods are already ruined and the penalty is due today. Alyssa does not have the money. Brian spent the retirement loan on her dress and the invitations. You have to pay these vendors, Michelle. They are going to ruin us." I smiled, feeling a profound sense of poetic justice settling over my shoulders. My sister had demanded a luxury lifestyle without earning the capital to sustain it. My parents had stolen my savings to subsidize her illusion. They had proudly signed their names to a fabricated reality. Now, Monday morning was approaching, and the bill for that illusion was coming due. The vendors did not care about social standing or Loudoun County gossip. They cared about their signed contracts, and they were going to extract every single penny from the woman who signed them. The financial collapse was imminent, and I was entirely insulated from the blast. The sunlight poured through the bare windows of our new home in Falls Church. We had not yet hung curtains, allowing the pale morning rays to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the empty living room. Ethan stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee in a French press. The aroma of dark roast beans grounded me. I wore oversized sweatpants and a thick woolen sweater, feeling a profound sense of safety within these brick walls. The burner phone rested on the kitchen island. It began to vibrate against the granite countertop. The screen displayed a restricted number. My parents were blocked on all conventional channels, but my father was a stubborn man. He had likely marched down to a local cellular retailer and purchased a prepaid device, or he was calling from a neighbor's landline. He needed to reach me. The financial walls were closing in on him, and I was the only escape hatch he had ever known. I picked up the device. I did not feel fear. I felt a quiet, surgical readiness. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the speaker to my ear. "Michelle," my father barked, his voice raw and stripped of its usual polished authority. "You are going to listen to me right now." I took a slow sip of the coffee Ethan handed me. "I am listening," I replied, my tone flat and unyielding. In the background, I could hear my mother weeping. It was not her practiced, theatrical crying designed to elicit sympathy at family gatherings. It was a ragged, guttural sound, the sound of a woman watching her curated social empire burn to ash. "The vendors are threatening litigation," my father choked out, his breathing shallow and rapid through the receiver. "The florist is demanding $12,000 for cut orchids they claim cannot be resold. The catering company issued a breach of contract invoice for $22,000 because they prepared specialty ingredients. The lighting and rental agency sent a bill for $11,000. They are going after your sister." I leaned against the kitchen island, staring at the quiet, tree-lined street outside my window. "That is how contracts work," I stated. "Alyssa signed the master service agreements. She assumed the financial liability." "She does not have $45,000, my father shouted, the desperation cracking his voice. "She maxed out her credit cards just to pay the initial retainers. They are threatening to send her accounts to collections by the end of the week. Her credit will be destroyed. This will ruin her life." I remained silent, letting his panic echo into the receiver. "You have savings," he demanded, reverting to his ingrained habit of treating my assets as communal property. "You have a federal salary. You need to wire the funds to Alyssa's account today. We will figure out a repayment plan later, but you have to stop these lawsuits. You are her sister." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air. He had spent the weekend humiliating me, stealing my venue, and endorsing Alyssa's vicious lies to the Virginia elite. Now, facing total ruin, he expected me to empty my bank accounts to shield the golden child from the consequences of her own vanity. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. The ceramic made a sharp, decisive click. "I am not sending you a single dollar," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. "Michelle," my father pleaded, the anger draining away into pure panic, "you cannot do this to your family. We need your help. We do not have the liquidity to cover this debt." "You had the liquidity 3 months ago," I reminded him, executing the final logical strike. You took a $10,000 loan against your retirement account. You proudly told me that money was dedicated to my wedding. You used it to buy my compliance. You used it to control me." He stammered, the words catching in his throat. "That was different. We had to reallocate those funds." "You stole those funds," I corrected him, slicing through his delusion. "You took the safety net you promised me and handed it to Alyssa so she could impress strangers. You told me I was delaying my life, so my money belonged to her. You made a financial calculation. You decided my future was worth sacrificing to fund her illusion." The silence on the line grew heavy, suffocating. The realization was finally penetrating his arrogance. "Because you took that $10,000, I continued, my tone devoid of pity, "you removed the only leverage you ever held over me. You spent the exact capital that could have partially bailed her out today. You bankrupted yourselves. You handed her the pen, you cheered while she signed those contracts, and you built this trap with your own 2 hands. Do not ask me to bleed for a wound you inflicted on yourselves." My mother's weeping grew louder in the background. Brian let out a shaky, defeated breath. "Michelle, please. This is the last time you will ever hear my voice," I stated, severing the emotional cord permanently. "If you, Nancy, or Alyssa attempt to contact me again, I will file harassment charges. Have a nice life in McLean." I ended the call. I did not block the new number immediately. I wanted them to hear the dial tone. I wanted the finality of the disconnection to ring in their ears. Ethan walked over and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood in the sunlit kitchen, breathing in the quiet peace of our new sanctuary. The toxic machinery of the Lee family had officially ground to a halt, crushed under the weight of its own greed. But a verbal boundary is only as strong as the legal framework supporting it. I needed to pour concrete over the line I just drew in the sand. At noon, I opened my laptop and initiated a video call with a close friend from my university days. Sarah was a senior corporate litigator at a ruthless firm in downtown Washington. She possessed a brilliant legal mind and zero tolerance for familial manipulation. I walked Sarah through the events of the weekend. I detailed the stolen funds, the character assassination, the venue cancellation, and the frantic phone call from my father demanding my savings. Sarah did not offer hollow sympathy. She offered immediate, tactical action. "I am drafting a formal cease and desist order right now," Sarah said, her fingers already flying across her mechanical keyboard. "I will outline a strict no-contact mandate covering you and Ethan. It will explicitly prohibit Brian, Nancy, and Alyssa Lee from approaching your residence, contacting your employers, or utilizing third-party intermediaries to solicit funds." "Make it airtight," I requested. "It will be titanium," Sarah promised, offering a sharp, predatory smile. "I am sending it via certified mail to their McLean address. It requires a signature upon delivery. They will hold the legal warning in their own hands by tomorrow afternoon. If they violate a single clause, I will drag them into a civil courtroom so fast their heads will spin." I thanked her, feeling the last remaining knot of tension dissolve in my chest. The legal wall was built. My physical footprint was erased. The financial liability rested squarely on the shoulders of the people who earned it. The poetic justice of the situation was profound. For nearly 3 decades, my parents had treated my sister like an infallible investment and treated me like a disposable resource. They had worshipped the illusion of high society, sacrificing their own integrity to impress the Virginia elite. Now, their golden child was legally tethered to $45,000 of inescapable debt. Alyssa would face collections. Her credit score would plummet, rendering her incapable of securing a luxury apartment or an elite vehicle for years to come. To save her from bankruptcy, Brian and Nancy would have to liquidate their own assets. They would likely be forced to take out a second mortgage on their pristine McLean home, fracturing the very foundation of the wealth they so desperately paraded. Their favoritism had cost them everything they valued. I spent the rest of Monday afternoon unpacking boxes with Ethan, filling our new home with books, warm blankets, and laughter. We ordered takeout from a local Thai restaurant and ate dinner sitting on the hardwood floor of our unfurnished living room. I tasted genuine freedom for the first time in my life. The storm had broken against the rocks, and my fortress remained entirely untouched. Tuesday morning arrived with a steady, gentle rain tapping against the window panes. I sat at my desk, opening my professional email client to review my upcoming defense contracts. A new message sat at the top of my inbox. The sender address did not belong to a government agency or a cybersecurity vendor. It belonged to a private server. The name displayed on the incoming message was Preston Cole. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the mouse. The Cole family had witnessed the entire humiliation at Oakwood Manor. They had severed ties with Alyssa in the gravel parking lot. There was no logical reason for Preston to seek me out, especially using my encrypted professional contact information. I clicked the subject line. It read, "Request for a private meeting." I opened the email. The text was brief, stripped of the arrogant, old-money demeanor he had wielded at my engagement dinner. Michelle Preston wrote, "My family conducted a thorough background investigation after the disaster this weekend. We uncovered the truth about your career, your finances, and the extensive fabrications your sister fed to us. I owe you a profound apology. I need to speak with you in person. Please name the time and the coffee shop. I will be there." The societal conflict had not just ended, it had inverted entirely. The elite family my parents worshipped had not only rejected the golden child, but they were now seeking an audience with the scapegoat. I selected a quiet, independent coffee shop on the edge of Old Town Alexandria for our meeting. The location sat several miles away from the wealthy enclaves of Loudoun County. It was neutral ground, devoid of valet parking, crystal chandeliers, and performative luxury. I replied to Preston Cole with the address and a specific time. 2 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. I arrived 15 minutes early. I ordered a black tea and chose a small wooden table near the back corner, positioning myself facing the main entrance. Rain continued to fall in a steady gray sheet against the storefront windows, blurring the shapes of passing cars. The cafe smelled of roasted beans, damp wool, and warm cinnamon. The hiss of the espresso machine and the low murmur of conversations provided a comforting, steady hum. Preston walked through the glass door at exactly 2 o'clock. The transformation in his physical appearance was striking. The man who had sat at my parents' dining table weeks ago reeked of effortless, generational entitlement. He had worn a tailored suit and a heavy silver watch that caught the chandelier light, speaking with the lazy drawl of someone who never had to fight for a single thing in his life. The man walking toward me now looked entirely defeated. He wore a simple dark rain jacket over a plain crewneck sweater. His shoulders slumped forward, carrying an invisible crushing weight. He looked pale and exhausted. He ordered a black coffee at the counter and navigated through the crowded cafe toward my table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Preston said, pulling out the wooden chair and sitting down heavily. His voice lacked its usual commanding cadence. It sounded hollow and stripped of all pretense. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. "You requested a meeting," I replied, keeping my tone professional and guarded. "What do you need to say?" He stared down at his ceramic mug, watching the steam curl into the cool air. He looked like a man trying to figure out how to dismantle a bomb after the blast wave had already leveled his house. "My family does not handle public embarrassment well," Preston began, tracing the rim of his cup with a restless finger. "When we left Oakwood Manor on Saturday, my mother was livid. She despises being made a fool in front of her social peers. The moment we returned to our estate, she immediately instructed our corporate attorneys to conduct a comprehensive background investigation into your family." I raised an eyebrow, letting a moment of silence pass between us. "A background check?" Preston nodded, his eyes finally meeting mine. "The Cole family wealth is not just built on commercial real estate, Michelle. Our primary holding company manages federal defense logistics. We operate in the exact same government contracting sphere that you do. Our lawyers have access to deep professional registries, financial databases, and security clearance verification networks." The pieces clicked together in my mind, forming a flawless picture. The Cole family did not just run a generic consumer credit check. They ran a full-spectrum professional audit utilizing federal industry channels. They looked you up, Preston continued, a note of genuine awe creeping into his weary voice. They saw your security clearance tier. They saw the high-level defense contracts your firm trusts you to manage. They saw your unblemished financial history, your steady income, and your stellar professional reputation within the cybersecurity sector. My mother realized very quickly that you are a highly successful, independent architect in a fiercely demanding field. I rested my hands flat on the wooden table, absorbing the information. And what did your corporate attorneys find when they investigated my sister? Preston closed his eyes for a brief second, a grimace of profound embarrassment washing over his features. They found a mountain of high-interest consumer debt. They discovered her job at the boutique wellness brand was essentially a minimum-wage social media internship subsidized by your father. They realized she possessed 0 assets, 0 property, and 0 actual influence. He leaned forward, lowering his voice so the patrons at the neighboring tables could not overhear the destruction of his personal life. For months, Alyssa spun this elaborate narrative to my mother and me. She claimed you were drowning in debt. She said you were a low-level data entry clerk who could not afford your own wedding deposit. She told us she swooped in with her superior savings to rescue the venue reservation to save you from public humiliation. She projected her own reality onto me, I noted, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. She lied about everything, Preston agreed, shaking his head in disbelief. She lied about her career trajectory, she lied about her finances, she lied about her own sister to elevate her status in my mother's eyes. When my parents saw the empirical truth on paper, when they realized the woman sobbing in the gravel parking lot was nothing but a fraudulent social climber, the verdict was instantaneous. Preston took a slow, deep breath, bracing himself for the final admission. My mother despises liars. She warned Alyssa about fabricating assets during a bridal fitting weeks ago. The moment the background check confirmed the deception, my mother orchestrated a full excommunication. The engagement is permanently terminated. My family lawyers sent Alyssa a formal notice severing all ties. The societal conflict that had plagued me for months dissolved right there in the quiet corner of the coffee shop. The elite Virginia family my parents so desperately worshipped had ruthlessly rejected their golden child. Furthermore, they had investigated the scapegoat and found genuine, undeniable merit. The social hierarchy my father tried to engineer had collapsed under the weight of empirical data. Real wealth recognized real work, and it fundamentally rejected the illusion Alyssa tried to sell. I owe you a profound apology, Preston said, his gaze fixed firmly on mine. At your engagement dinner and at the rehearsal dinner last week, I treated you with condescension. I allowed my family to view you as a subordinate. I believed the lies Alyssa fed me, and I acted with unearned arrogance. I am deeply sorry, Michelle. You did not deserve any of that treatment. I evaluated his apology, parsing his words for hidden motives. It sounded sincere. He had been a pawn in my sister's game, a shiny trophy she used to validate her own existence. He lost his dignity in that parking lot, and he was now sitting in a modest cafe, attempting to regain a fraction of his honor by owning his mistake. I accept your apology, Preston, I replied, my voice softening just a fraction. You walked into a toxic dynamic that existed long before you arrived, but you also chose to embrace the arrogance without questioning the foundation. Let this be a lesson in due diligence. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. I will never ignore a red flag again. He reached into his rain jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope, sliding it across the wooden table toward my teacup. This is a cashier check, he explained. My mother requested I deliver this to you personally. It covers the $15,000 deposit you absorbed when you canceled the Oakwood Manor contract. She insists you should not bear the financial burden of my former fiancé's delusion. I looked at the heavy paper envelope. Victoria Cole was tying up loose ends, ensuring her family owed no debts to anyone associated with the Lee household. It was a sterile, corporate gesture of respect from one professional to another. Tell your mother I appreciate the reimbursement, I said, sliding the envelope into my purse. Preston stood up from the table, buttoning his jacket to prepare for the rain. Before I go, you need to know one more thing. Alyssa is not handling the breakup well. She is frantic. She is telling anyone who will listen that you hacked the venue's computer system and sabotaged her life. She blames you for losing me, and she blames you for the vendor debt crushing her right now. A drowning person will drag anyone down with them, I observed, picking up my tea. Just be careful, Preston warned, his tone grave. She has nothing left to lose, and she is desperately looking for a target to absorb her anger. He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the gray afternoon. I sat at the table for a while longer, listening to the rain hit the glass. The plot twist was staggering. The very wealth and status my family tried to use against me had become the exact instrument of their exposure. The Cole family valued data over drama. They respected my career and banished my sister. The victory felt clean, thorough, and final. But Preston's warning echoed in my mind as I drove back to my secure office in Alexandria. Alyssa was cornered. Her credit was destroyed, her engagement was terminated, and her social standing was annihilated. She was a golden child stripped of her gold, and she was looking for someone to punish. The following morning, I sat at my desk on the 4th floor of my federal contracting building. The sun shone brightly through the reinforced glass windows, reflecting off the Potomac River. I was reviewing a routine network security protocol when the internal phone line on my desk chimed. I picked up the receiver. Michelle Lee speaking. Miss Lee, the voice of the head security guard echoed through the line. His tone was tight, urgent, and highly professional. We have a situation in the main lobby. There is a woman down here demanding to see you. She bypassed the visitor screening protocol and is causing a significant disruption. She claims she is your sister. The final confrontation had arrived. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me inside the polished steel cabin. The digital display ticked downward from the 4th floor, counting the seconds until I faced the final remnant of my past. My pulse remained steady. I did not feel the familiar, suffocating dread that used to accompany any interaction with my sister. The architecture of my mind had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the invisible workhorse, terrified of displeasing the golden child. I was a federal cybersecurity contractor, descending into my own domain, protected by concrete, steel, and unshakable truth. The doors chimed and parted, revealing the sprawling, cavernous lobby of our corporate headquarters. The space was designed to project governmental authority. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gray waters of the Potomac River. Thick pillars of cold gray marble supported the vaulted ceiling. Security personnel in dark tactical uniforms monitored the perimeter, standing near the reinforced turnstiles that separated the public atrium from the restricted elevators. Alyssa stood dead center in the middle of the visitor screening area. The visual contrast between the woman I saw at the bridal boutique and the person standing before me was stark. Her pristine, curated facade had shattered. She wore a wrinkled designer trench coat over yoga pants, looking as though she had slept in her clothes. Her blonde hair, usually styled into flawless waves, hung in messy, tangled strands around her face. Mascara smudged the skin beneath her eyes, leaving dark, jagged streaks down her pale cheeks. She was pacing frantically in front of the security desk, gesturing wildly at the stoic guard positioned behind the bulletproof glass. "I need to see Michelle Lee," Alyssa shrieked, her voice cracking and echoing harshly against the marble walls. "You do not understand. She works here. She is my sister and she ruined my life. Call her down right now." The head security guard, a towering veteran named Marcus, spotted me stepping out of the elevator bay. He raised a hand, signaling his team to hold their positions. He knew me well. I audited their access protocols every quarter. He waited for my instruction, respecting my authority within the building. I walked across the vast expanse of the lobby. The sharp click of my low heels against the polished granite signaled my approach. Alyssa spun around, her erratic movements halting the moment she locked eyes with me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, untethered desperation. She lunged forward, stopping only when 2 tactical guards shifted smoothly into her path, crossing their arms to form a physical barrier. "Michelle!" Alyssa screamed, her voice shrill and trembling. "You did this! You orchestrated all of it! You destroyed everything I had!" I stopped walking, leaving a deliberate 6-foot gap between us. I stood with my spine straight, my hands folded loosely in front of me. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical, measured tone I use during high-stakes federal briefings. "Keep your voice down, Alyssa," I instructed softly, letting the cold acoustics of the lobby carry my words. "You are in a secure government facility, not a country club." She let out a ragged, breathless sob, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. Preston left me. His family sent a courier to the apartment this morning to demand the engagement ring back. They canceled the accounts. They locked me out of the country club. Victoria Cole told everyone in our social circle that I am a fraud. I have nothing left. That is the consequence of fabricating your reality, I replied, my expression unyielding. She pressed her hands to her temples, tugging at her unkempt hair. You sabotaged me, she wailed, her eyes wild with misdirected blame. You hacked the venue. You stole my wedding date. You tricked me into signing those vendor contracts. You bankrupted Mom and Dad. They had to list the McLean house for a home equity line of credit just to keep the catering company from suing me for fraud. You broke our family. I stood there, listening to her hurl every accusation in her arsenal. She was a drowning swimmer flailing in the water, desperately searching for a raft to drag down with her. In the past, I would have thrown myself into the current to save her. I would have absorbed her debt, accepted her blame, and apologized for surviving. Today, I remained safely on the shore. I did not hack the venue, I stated, systematically dissecting her delusion. I legally canceled the contract that I funded with my own independent capital. You walked into Oakwood Manor assuming you owned the property simply because you desired it. You knew, she cried out, her shoulders shaking. You knew they would turn me away. I forwarded you the automated cancellation notice 48 hours before your event, I reminded her, watching the realization flicker briefly in her tear-filled eyes. You chose to delete the warning because it interrupted your hot stone massage. You ignored empirical data because it inconvenienced your vanity. Alyssa gripped the velvet rope of the security stanchion, her knuckles turning white. What about the vendors? She demanded, her voice dropping into a hoarse, bitter whisper. You acted like my coordinator. You handed me those papers. You forced me into $45,000 of debt. I never forced your hand, I corrected, my tone dropping to an icy definitive register. I placed printed documents onto a kitchen counter. You picked up the pen. You signed your name on the financial guarantor line without reading a single paragraph. You wanted the prestige of directing a luxury gala, but you refused to undertake the logistical labor. Your signature anchored you to that debt, Alyssa. No one else held the pen. She let out a broken, shallow gasp, the air rushing out of her lungs. You are cruel, she whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes and cutting clean tracks through her ruined makeup. Mom and Dad are losing their savings because of you. They are taking out loans to fix this. They are taking out loans because they stole my $10,000 catering fund to subsidize your illusion, I countered, dismantling her final defense. They bank their entire financial security on your ability to secure a wealthy husband. They treated me like a disposable asset, and they treated you like a winning lottery ticket. They placed a reckless gamble, and the house always wins. Alyssa stared at me, her chest heaving. The frantic energy began to drain from her posture, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of undeniable truth. She had run out of lies to tell. She had run out of people to blame. You built an explosive device out of your own entitlement, I told her, holding her gaze with steady, unwavering focus. You rigged it with your lies to the Cole family. You armed the device with your signature on those vendor agreements. You set the timer yourself. All I did was refuse to throw my body on top of it when the clock hit 0. I stepped out of the blast radius, and you are angry because you had to absorb the shockwave of your own actions. She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound emerged. She looked around the cavernous marble lobby. She looked at the armed security guards watching her with stony indifference. She looked at the federal employees walking past the turnstiles, ignoring her entirely. For her entire life, Alyssa existed in a curated bubble where her tears commanded immediate rescue. If she cried, our parents rushed in with checkbooks and apologies. If she complained, the world bent to accommodate her demands. She had finally collided with a boundary that refused to bend. Please, Michelle, she begged, her voice shrinking into a pathetic small whimper. I have no money. My credit is ruined. I do not even have a place to live because Preston canceled my lease. You are my sister. You have to help me. I looked at the woman who had mocked my municipal hall brochure. I looked at the woman who told the Virginia elite I was a destitute failure. We are done here, I said quietly. I turned my head toward Marcus, the head security guard. I did not need to issue a verbal command. I offered a simple, decisive nod. Marcus stepped forward, signaling his team. 2 guards flanked Alyssa, gently but firmly grasping her elbows. "Ma'am," Marcus stated, his voice booming with undeniable authority, "you are disrupting a secure federal facility. It is time for you to leave the premises." "No!" Alyssa gasped, trying weakly to pull her arms free. "Wait! Michelle, please!" I turned my back on her. I walked toward the secure turnstiles, swiping my identification badge against the optical reader. The glass barrier slid open with a soft, satisfying hiss. I stepped through the threshold, leaving the public atrium behind. I did not look over my shoulder as the guards escorted my sister out the heavy revolving doors, marching her out into the damp Virginia afternoon. I did not watch her disappear onto the crowded sidewalk. The primary sibling rivalry that had defined the first nearly 3 decades of my life concluded right there in the cold, sterile lobby of a government building. It did not end with a dramatic shouting match or a cinematic physical altercation. It ended with the quiet, devastating enforcement of reality. I walked into the waiting elevator, pressing the button for the 4th floor. The steel doors closed, shutting out the ambient noise of the lobby. I rode the car upward, feeling the gentle upward momentum pull me toward my office, toward my career, and toward the future I had secured with my own 2 hands. The emotional tether was permanently severed, and the freedom I felt was absolute. 6 months have passed since the steel elevator doors closed on my former life. Spring arrived in Northern Virginia with a quiet, vibrant brilliance. The cherry blossoms bloomed along the Potomac River, casting delicate pink reflections against the dark water. I sat on the wraparound porch of our brick home in Falls Church, wrapping my hands around a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The morning air smelled of damp earth and blooming dogwoods. Ethan sat beside me on the wooden swing, grading history essays with a red pen, occasionally reading a funny historical inaccuracy out loud. This was peace. It was not a performative display of wealth designed to impress state politicians. It was a genuine, quiet sanctuary. We had returned from our honeymoon just a few weeks prior. The trip to the Amalfi Coast was everything my original Loudoun County wedding was never destined to be. We spent 14 days navigating winding coastal roads, eating fresh seafood on sun-drenched terraces, and watching the Mediterranean tide roll against the ancient cliffs. We paid for every hotel, every meal, and every excursion, using the capital we saved by pivoting our ceremony to the historic Alexandria Library. The money my parents tried to steal, the funds they believed belonged to my sister's vanity, had instead purchased memories that would last us a lifetime. We built our foundation on joy, while they buried theirs in debt. Information travels fast through the interwoven social circles of the Washington suburbs. Ethan occasionally grabbed drinks with his former roommate Greg, the real estate broker who navigated the same elite networks as the Cole family. Through these peripheral channels, the aftermath of the Oakwood Manor disaster slowly trickled into our awareness. The financial reckoning had been swift and merciless. When the catering company, the Parisian florist, and the lighting crew filed their breach of contract lawsuits, they targeted the sole signatory on the master service agreements. Alyssa faced a barrage of legal summons. Her credit score plummeted overnight, triggering the cancellation of her premium credit cards and terminating her lease in Reston. She had nowhere to hide and no capital to deploy. To save their golden child from immediate bankruptcy, Brian and Nancy executed the only maneuver left to them. They walked into a local bank and took out a second mortgage on their pristine McLean home. The white colonial house, the very symbol of their curated status, became a heavily leveraged liability. They drained the equity they had spent decades building, sacrificing their retirement security to pay off $45,000 in vendor fees for a party that never happened. The irony was profound. They had stolen my $10,000 catering fund to maintain an illusion of wealth, and that specific theft initiated the chain reaction that bankrupted their reality. Alyssa's social standing evaporated instantly. The Virginia elite operate on a strict code of authenticity when it comes to generational wealth. The Cole family's swift rejection served as a permanent exile. Alyssa was blacklisted from every country club and charity gala in the county. Without Preston's name to shield her, and without my father's limitless bank account to subsidize her lifestyle, she was forced to enter the actual workforce. According to the rumors, she secured employment at a high-end department store in Tyson's Galleria. She was not a boutique buyer or a public relations manager. She worked the customer service return desk. The poetic justice of her new reality was striking. The woman who had spent her entire life treating everyone around her like disposable staff was now wearing a polyester uniform, mandated to smile and apologize to angry shoppers. She spent 40 hours a week processing returns, untangling receipts, and absorbing the complaints of the exact demographic she once sought to impress. Every paycheck she earned went directly to Brian and Nancy to slowly chip away at the second mortgage. The heavy, restrictive designer gown she wore in the gravel parking lot had indeed become a physical cage, trapping her in a cycle of retail labor and insurmountable debt. I did not seek out this information, nor did I celebrate it. I simply observed it from a safe, detached distance. My focus remained firmly on my own future. However, the final test of my resolve arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I walked out to the curb to check the mail. Mixed among the utility bills and grocery circulars was a pale blue envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. The slanted, meticulous cursive belonged to my mother. The return address listed the McLean property. I stood in my driveway feeling the warm spring breeze rustle the leaves of the oak tree in my front yard. I held the blue envelope in my hand. A year ago, a letter from my mother would have triggered a spike of anxiety. I would have opened it immediately, searching the paragraphs for hidden criticisms or manipulative demands. I would have let her words dictate my emotional state for the rest of the week. Today, my pulse remained steady. I did not feel fear. I did not feel curiosity. I felt a quiet, impenetrable indifference. I carried the mail inside the house. I walked directly into my home office. I did not slice the envelope open. I did not hold it up to the light to glimpse the contents. I simply fed the unopened letter into the mechanical paper shredder resting beside my desk. The steel blades whirred to life, pulling the pale blue paper downward, slicing the unread apologies or fresh demands into thin, illegible strips of confetti. The machine clicked off, leaving behind a profound, uninterrupted silence. The physical act of destroying the letter was empowering. It reinforced the perimeter of my sanctuary. Looking back at the trajectory of my family, the psychological dynamics are painfully clear. My parents engineered a toxic ecosystem built entirely on enabling and exploitation. They cultivated a golden child, showering Alyssa with unearned praise and limitless resources, insulating her from the friction of reality. In doing so, they stunted her growth, turning her into a fragile, entitled adult, incapable of surviving a single genuine hardship. Simultaneously, they cast me in the role of the scapegoat. I was the invisible workhorse, expected to absorb the financial and emotional deficits generated by their favoritism. They believed my independence meant I required no support, and they confused my silence for submission. But pain is an excellent teacher. The constant rejection forced me to develop resilience. The lack of financial support forced me to build my own formidable career in cybersecurity. The very conditions they imposed to keep me small were the exact conditions that forged my strength. Enabling toxic behavior does not save a family. It corrodes the foundation from the inside out. My parents thought they were protecting their legacy by bailing Alyssa out, but they were merely feeding a delusion that eventually consumed everything they valued. They prioritized performative status over genuine connection, and in the end, they were left with neither. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and walked back out to the wraparound porch. Ethan looked up from his stack of essays, offering a bright, familiar smile. I sat beside him, leaning my head against his shoulder, listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood, waking up to the weekend. The true payoff of this entire ordeal was not the spectacular collapse of my sister's engagement. It was not the financial ruin of the people who stole from me. The true payoff was the profound, unshakable freedom I felt in this exact moment. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had protected my peace. I had chosen a partner who respected my intellect and stood by me when the storm broke. I survived the fire, and I used the ashes to build a fortress. Blood does not dictate loyalty, and setting boundaries isn't betrayal. It is the architecture of survival. The story of Michelle Lee, the invisible sister who orchestrated a silent, devastating financial collapse simply by walking away, is a narrative that lingers in the mind long after the final word is spoken. At first glance, it reads as a brilliantly executed tale of vengeance, a satisfying destruction of arrogant people who pushed a quiet woman too far. But if we peel back the layers of canceled venues, stolen catering funds, and Loudoun County social politics, what remains is a profound, uncomfortable masterclass in parenting, family responsibility, and the perilous architecture of conditional love. In the landscape of modern American culture, the family unit is often treated not just as a sanctuary of kinship, but as a billboard of success. There is a relentless, unspoken pressure to curate a legacy, to secure the right zip code, the right universities, and the right marriages. Brian and Nancy Lee represent the darkest culmination of this cultural pressure. They represent a deeply insidious brand of parental failure, the weaponization of favoritism disguised as support. We often think of bad parenting in terms of absence, neglect, or outright malice, but the tragedy of the Lee family illustrates how enabling a child can be just as destructive as abandoning one. By constantly shielding Alyssa from the friction of reality, subsidizing her superficial lifestyle, excusing her habitual lies, and literally stealing from their other daughter to fund her vanity, Brian and Nancy did not protect their favored child. They lobotomized her ability to survive the real world. They raised a daughter who believed the world was a stage, and she was its eternal, untouchable star, completely ignorant of the fact that she was standing on a trapdoor of her own making. A traditional family structure only holds its weight when its foundational pillars are built upon honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. The Lees discarded these values for the intoxicating allure of old money proximity and social climbing. They failed to teach Alyssa the most basic, fundamental equation of adulthood, that choices have consequences, and that a legally binding signature on a contract cannot be waved away with a temper tantrum. True parental responsibility is not about smoothing every bump in the road so your child never trips. It is about equipping your child with the shock absorbers necessary to navigate the inevitable potholes of life. Fairness in parenting does not necessarily mean cutting every pie exactly down the middle. It means demanding equal accountability and nurturing the unique character of each child without pitting them against one another in a competition for affection. By denying Alyssa the word no, her parents ensured the world would eventually say it to her with devastating, irrevocable force. They handed her a loaded weapon of entitlement and simply watched as she pulled the pin. Then we must look at Michelle, the scapegoat, the invisible workhorse. Her journey forces us to look in the mirror and ask terrifying questions about how we distribute affection within our own homes. Michelle was starved of emotional support and financial backing. She was forced to watch her parents drain their own retirement savings to fund her sister's illusion, while her own genuine achievements in federal cybersecurity were casually dismissed as just typing. Yet, this very deprivation forged a titanium spine. The coldness she endured forced her to develop profound emotional awareness. She learned the vital, painful skill of detachment. She learned to assess a toxic dynamic clinically and to understand that her inherent worth was not defined by her family's tragic inability to see it. While her sister learned to rely on the fragile safety nets woven by their parents, Michelle learned to build her own fortress out of stone, logic, and self-reliance. We crave stories like this because they hold up a mirror to the quiet, often unspoken injustices that occur in our own living rooms and around our own dining tables. They force us to examine the roles we play and the boundaries we either enforce or abandon. If you find yourself captivated by these deep dives into family dynamics, psychological boundaries, and the profound consequences of our hidden choices, I highly encourage you to like this video and subscribe to Grape Echo Stories. It is in spaces like this channel where we can unpack the complex, sometimes painful realities of human relationships and find the courage to rewrite our own narratives. Ultimately, the most profound lesson of this story requires us to challenge our most deeply held beliefs about family. Conventional wisdom dictates that parental love is defined by what we give. We measure a mother or father's devotion by the sacrifices they make, the checks they write, the doors they open, and the pain they spare their children. We view the withholding of support as a parent's greatest crime. But the ruin of the Lee family forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable paradox. Brian and Nancy gave Alyssa absolutely everything: their money, their loyalty, their morality, and ultimately, their own financial security. In doing so, they destroyed her. They built a cage of dependence so thick she could not survive outside of it. But look at what they gave Michelle. They gave her nothing. They gave her rejection, indifference, and a stolen catering fund. And that nothing was the greatest, albeit accidental, gift they could have ever bestowed. The rejection forced her to build her own sanctuary, brick by brick, free from the rot of their conditional approval. It makes you wonder, as you look at the children in your own life, the ones you are so desperately trying to protect and provide for. Are you building them a solid foundation, or are you just buying them a very expensive cage? Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is step back, let the cold wind blow, and trust that their child will learn how to build their own fire. And for those who have only ever known the cold, perhaps the warmth you have spent your whole life searching for was never meant to come from the hearth you were born into, but from the one you strike yourself.